Good morning, everybody. My name is Joe Obleidinger. I'm with Public Impact. We are an education policy and management consulting organization based in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And I'm very excited to be here with you this morning to talk about blended learning models and staffing. What you see on the left-hand side of this slide is the two main ingredients in blended learning, teaching and technology and digital content. If you go back to the Insight definition in your pre-reading and that I believe Amy covered this morning, there are two components to blended learning. So there's some element of online delivery of content and or instruction with an element of student control. And a number of you have talked about one of the groups really spotlighted student control. And the other piece is, to some degree, education that's delivered in a brick and mortar location away from home. So lining that up with what's on the left-hand side of the slide, digital content, very evident in that definition. Teaching is both in part delivered online in some blended models, but also delivered in that brick and mortar space away from home, generally a school. If those are the ingredients, the model then becomes the recipe for creating the blended learning. And I would posit to you that when we add quality into the mix, we need to go back to our ingredients and focus in on quality there too. So one of the panelists this morning talked about the evolution of digital content. It might not be great yet, but it's good enough, and it is predictably improving. But we also need to focus on excellent teaching. So what we're going to be talking about for the rest of the morning up till lunch is one of these ingredients, staffing, excellent teaching, and the model. The model is the first crucial decision that many of you will make in choosing how to blend these two ingredients, making a choice that's best fit for your circumstances, for your students, for your staff, for the kind of school culture that you want to create. So we're going to talk first about the models, then about staffing, and then after lunch, John Watson is going to be back up here talking with you about content. I hope that this morning you're going to get three things out of our discussion. The first is an opportunity to see what some blended models look like to the extent you're not familiar with them already, and to analyze them. And then in groups with the other experts in the room, those of your peers at the table and the various facilitators, really dig into them, consider their strengths and their weaknesses. And finally, to synthesize your understanding of the different models and apply that back to the challenges that brought you here today and to your schools and your districts. Looking at the agenda, the first half of our time together will be focused on models. We're going to very quickly, within the next 5 minutes, go out to the tables and give you an opportunity to see a specific model and a specific school implementing that model in practice, and then to talk with one another about the strengths and weaknesses of that. Then you will report out to the group on that model. If we have time before 11:15, we'll ask you to try to synthesize that and apply it to your own situation. We'll have an intermission. Exactly what that looks like is going to depend on how the first part of the discussion goes. So I'll get back to you on that. And then after that intermission, we'll be talking about staffing for the remaining 45 minutes of our time together today. So I will talk with you a bit about how staffing, some ways that staffing structures can relate to the blended models we'll be discussing. And then we'll do a staffing scenario, again, going to the tables, giving you an opportunity to really grapple with the ways that you might use staffing to extend the reach of your great teachers to more students. And for the last 15 minutes or so, we'll bring these two topics together before lunch. So bringing models and staffing together. This was in your pre-reading. It is a graphic from the Insight Institute's Classifying Blended Learning publication. Can I get a show of hands of how many people in here feel like you are really, really familiar with the 7, in effect, types of blended models that are on this screen? Okay. How many of you are seeing these either for the first time right now or in the pre-reading? Okay, so that's kind of a healthy mix, and I'm trusting the rest of you are somewhere in between. What we're going to do, instead of me standing here and lecturing to you about what each of these are in kind of a lecture from the front of the room kind of a way, is that I'm going to assign each table a model, and each model is going to have a school attached to it. And we have someone assigned to each table who's going to show you a video, and then there will be a print handout. So you're going to have an opportunity for the first 10 minutes to view your video and quietly or silently read your handout. And what I'd like you to do is take a look at the green, and for some of you blue, handout that was in your packet, and look at the second to last page that says Blended Models, Key Questions, Worksheet. If you could take a minute while we're getting the videos set up and the case study materials passed out, and take a look at these questions. These are what we're going to be asking you to discuss in your groups after you've had a chance to look at the videos and the case studies. So we're only going to have 10 minutes to watch these videos and read the case studies. So I want you to be really targeted in your reading and in your thinking about these schools and the models that they're using. Think about what's working well. Think about what problem the school leaders are trying to address in the school that you're looking at. What's working well? What do you find most compelling about the approach they've taken? And where does the model fall short? What could they be doing better to address their problem? What other models might they be using, or tweaks could they make to their model to make it more impactful for their students? After we have had an opportunity for you to read, view the videos, you're going to have an opportunity to talk in your tables about these questions, and then we're going to have a report out. And what I'm going to ask you to do, because I expect that these conversations will go in a few different directions, I'm going to ask you when we report out to first spend just about 30 seconds talking about your school, what it is, what model they're using. And I'll say just a brief setup comment about each model to lead you into talking about how your school is doing it. And then I'd like you to just pick one question on here and report back to the group about the discussion that you had around that question. So we'll zero in on one impactful aha moment or statement that was made in your group that you felt like kind of brought together your observations about this model. So let me break now and ask the folks who I've assigned videos and case studies to pass those out and get the videos set up and give you an opportunity to watch and to read. Actually, one more thing before it gets loud in here. Well, two more things. The first one is I really do want you to focus on the schools that we're assigning to you. So it might be really tempting to say, well, we aren't going to do that at our school because we're going to have an opportunity to do that and to pull this back to where you all are. But just for the next 20 minutes, I want you to focus just on the school that you're looking at and strengths and weaknesses from the perspective of the school leaders there. Second point, for those of you showing videos, if you could aim your machines toward the outside of the room, that will help with the noise level. We'll have 11 videos playing in here simultaneously. It could get a little noisy, and we'll cut back on that a little bit if we face those machines toward the outside of the room. So we'll see what happens with that. Let's get the video set up. All right. If you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. If you can hear me, clap 4 times and look at me. Okay, what we're going to do, it's not going to be quite as rapid fire as going around the tables before, but we are going to try to keep it moving so that we can get back into your tables to talk about all of the models and how this applies to all of you and the circumstances you find yourselves in outside of this room, back at your schools and in your day-to-day work. So what we're going to do is go through each of the models. I'll say just a little bit, 30 seconds or less about each model, and then we'll go to the group or groups that have been looking at schools using this model. So we're starting in the Innosight taxonomy with the rotation model. And the distinctive features of the rotation model are that students rotate among groups on a fixed schedule. So in the graphic on the screen, you have students rotating among teacher-led instruction, collaborative activities and stations, and online instruction. How this becomes an instance of blended learning is that one of the stations is an online or digital content station. So classroom-level rotations are very familiar to those of you who work in elementary schools. The key factor here is that the station involves online learning. We have 2 groups back there that did the Oakland Unified School District. And so what I'd like to ask is for one of those 2 groups to tell us just a minute about what Oakland is doing, and then one issue that came up in your group that you found compelling, something that you think Oakland could be doing better, your response to one of the questions on the sheet. So if I could get a volunteer from one of the 2 Oakland Unified School District groups.
So I'll just to help them out, we ended up spending more time talking about the videos, which were on
Okay. All right, so we don't have an Oakland Unified video yet, so each of the Oakland Unified groups watched a video for a different classroom rotation model. One watched KIPP Empower, and one watched Aspire. So if you'd like to, feel free to talk about Aspire or KIPP Empower, whatever your discussion was about. All of those 3 examples are of rotation, classroom station rotation models.
Yes, for us, the idea of station rotation based on the idea of station rotation model, I think, was almost agreed upon that maybe would fit elementary better than a high school setting. Being in elementary, I feel like you really do need more teacher collaboration, and I feel like the rotation model really gives more teacher collaboration with the student, more of a safety net at the beginning of the beginning of their schooling, whereas they can go out and individualize more and more as they get older. So the rotation model was ours. One of the things, though, was that, compared to if it's completely individualized compared to some of the other models, it's still a fixed schedule, almost like centers, and it's definitely not completely individualized like it could be in another model.
Okay. And could I get just a quick comment from the other classroom rotation group? And which school did you watch the video for?
The Aspire school.
Okay.
Yeah. So, we were talking. Actually, we were talking about the video and just asking some questions. So we didn't have a lot of time to go through that. But it's interesting because it actually is very similar to what our school that we have here in Denver over at West High School is. And we found that it works well in a middle high school because it provides an opportunity for collaborative learning, smaller kind of groups coming together. So it provides a lot of benefits. I love seeing the technology platform that they're using because I think that provides just a great base for the teachers. So we're going to go back and take a look at that.
Excellent. And so between these two groups, I think your comment about this fitting best with the elementary level, it is a more natural fit because, like you said, you've already got centers at the elementary level. So you want to
I was just going to add something that we found with our schools that a teacher that's used to teaching, say, in an elementary school setting where they're used to managing different stations and rotations, you kind of need, and that's a different thing of going to middle and high school because the teachers wouldn't naturally be used to that. So we want somebody that has that bent to come in because it is managing the classroom differently.
So I think it's true that it would require a bigger shift in going to a middle or high school level. That doesn't mean it's not being done or that it won't continue to be done more in the coming years. I think we do see, and those of you who know the more flexible models in the room can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think at that secondary level, the models that are being implemented are more flexible, more on the other end of the spectrum that we're going to go through as we move through these models. Carrie?
Just one other observation. We had a person at one of our tables say, I don't know, question 5, I didn't really see, maybe the video didn't really show how they were using time or space or staffing in an innovative way. And I said, yeah, that's exactly right. This is kind of the easiest entrance into blended learning, the most natural stage, but they noticed that it was still that one teacher with one class of students all day long in a fairly traditional structure, and that they hadn't done a lot to innovate around staff and time and space.
Absolutely. That's a hugely important point and one that we'll come back to in the staffing discussion in a little while. I'd like to move on. We don't have a video for the lab rotation or a group that focused on that, except that the Oakland Unified School District, which those two groups read about and which Carrie knows well, feel free to jump in if you have anything to add on the lab rotation in Oakland. But 2 of the schools in the Oakland Unified School District's blended learning pilot use a lab rotation for part of the day. So for most of the time, they are a classroom rotation model, but they also have students do a lab rotation. And what the difference is between classroom level rotation and lab rotation is the physical space where the rotation occurs. So in the station rotation or the classroom rotation, students are moving within a contained classroom. In a lab rotation, they're moving to a different physical space in the school or on the campus. So that's the distinction between those two. But in both of them, you still have students moving on a fixed schedule among the different modalities.
I think the one thing I would say is just the lab rotation seems to be an easier way to open up time or save money than the station rotation. So, for example, one of the schools used to have their intervention specialist going into classrooms and pulling out small groups or doing some push-in with small groups. They moved that intervention specialist into a lab where they found that that person could both kind of manage the classroom management of students on computers and do the intervention in the center. And so they were able to use that teacher to now take students out of 3 other classes and either reduce the class size in those classes or, specifically send students to the lab. So with a fairly small switch, they were able to use staff in a way that gave those other classroom teachers smaller class sizes or time to do things differently.
Excellent. The third model on here that's under the rotation is the flipped classroom, and I probably don't need to tell all of you about flipping. This is the birthplace of the flipped classroom in Colorado, so I'm sure you know it. The key features here, you still have students on a fixed schedule, but that fixed schedule involves both what they're doing during the day and what they're doing at home during the evening. The key feature of the flipped classroom is that the main delivery of basic content takes place over the internet at night in a separate place than the school building, and then students engage in enrichment activities with the teacher around that content during the school day. The fourth rotation model, we do have a group that looked into this, actually 2 of them, that looked at Carpe Diem, which does the individual rotation. Here, you still have students rotating on a fixed schedule, so it's still a rotation model. But students are moving in a more individualized way. Where they go and when they do it is tailored to the data that is presented to their teachers. So without saying more about it, I will turn this over to the Carpe Diem groups to tell us how Carpe Diem is using this model and a key feature from your discussion.
Okay, Carpe Diem uses E2020, which is a scripted curriculum. And in that design model, they have students rotate throughout the day between online activities in their learning center and face-to-face classroom instruction where there are coaches, whether that is a teacher or a paraprofessional working with the students. Each rotation lasts about 55 minutes. But mainly you can see they're in that central learning lab, and then they choose to go out to whether they need direct instruction, seminar, or interventions. One thing we noticed in the film, it does show up here group projects, but we didn't see any evidence of that in the film, so we were concerned about collaborative projects that students would work on, because we do believe this model may lend itself to projects and students learning about collaboration. When they talked about their scores have skyrocketed, and they've become a very well-known charter school in Arizona. But it was, with the scripted curriculum, we felt as though it was teaching to the test, that it was all about getting that higher score, and that there wasn't a lot of flexibility because of the curriculum that was used. One of the teachers made a comment in the film. Students really want to get the right answers. And that struck us as, are they teaching them about failure? And that failure is part of the learning process. And it may not necessarily be about getting the right answer all the time, but the process that we go through to get to that answer, or that there might be multiple answers. We were very concerned, again, that it didn't, this type of style using that curriculum, that scripted curriculum, that they never moved beyond the knowledge, that they weren't looking at application of that knowledge or transfer of that knowledge to real life application skills.
Great, and let me pull in the other Carpe Diem group to see if you have something to add. That was a great summary of your thoughts on that model.
You guys?
I guess I'm doing it. So one thing that we noticed on the positive side was that there was clearly a culture that created almost like a family kind of environment. There were a number of kids who talked about how even though there were fewer teachers, there's one teacher for each subject, they got to know them really well over the course of multiple years. They felt really well known. There was some concern, however, that to echo the other group here, that there was limited evidence of any project-based learning, and so there's some concern that you've got kids on computers in cubicles, and that may work really well for some group of kids, especially kids who may feel more ostracized from sort of traditional large classrooms of kids and may sort of excel at that. But there was a question as to whether this kind of a model was going to make sense for a lot of kids nationally. Anything else that I'm missing? Oops. Okay.
All right, and I do think that Carpe Diem does more than was shown in the video, and that does, as this depicts, include spaces, both physical spaces and times in the school day where they engage in group projects. The flex model is another step along the spectrum towards individualization, personalization. The key in the flex model is that instruction is being delivered primarily over the internet. So students are engaged in online learning for a good portion of the day, and then they are pulled out on a customized, fluid schedule. So it's different from the rotation where it's on a fixed schedule. Students are pulled out as needed into groups for individual tutoring, for other enrichment activities. And we have an example of this in the USC Hybrid High School. We have at least one group that looked at the USC Hybrid High School. So if I could get thoughts from you on what that model looks like and how it struck you. I think this group here was one, table 5, and this group as well. Over here, Amy, this group was one.
John would like to talk. John's been quiet for, an hour now.
We started, after reading the case study and looking at the video, really exploring what USC is doing, and very rapidly got to the point of discussion about how it's a startup. It's a new program, and that, Joe, unfortunately led us a little bit off track because we got into this discussion of how do you take what a program like USC Hybrid High has done and apply it to an existing school, an existing system. And there are certainly some challenges, but what we're able to talk about is the way that DPS has been able to address some of those things. We got really into what I thought was a fascinating discussion about the differences between bringing content in from a variety of providers versus having teachers really engaged in creating that, and the sense among the table here that teacher buy-in is so critical. I think there's really some differences in the way that we think about differentiation between the type of differentiation or differentiated instruction that might happen through some software, whether it's Alex that somebody mentioned, Dreambox at a different level, Achieve 3000, and those sorts of things, versus the type of differentiation that this group feels like still happens with teacher-created content as well. And I think it's going to be something that we're going to be going back to in the session this afternoon.
Great. And this group over here also did USC Hybrid High. If you guys could say a little bit more about what that model looks like for those who haven't experienced or don't know about the Flex model, how it's played out at USC.
So the model of the school is they are open 7 days a week, 12 hours a day for 310 days of the year. And so we immediately started talking about how there's a scheduling opportunity and a scheduling conflict with that sort of a setup. And trying to figure out how they could address the scheduling, how they can address the socio and emotional needs of their students, and with combining the instruction via the internet with the collaborative work and the internships that makes up about 50% of what they're doing at that school. I think that the couple of things that we talked about that we liked was that it's mastery based. They have student created projects, and they combine delivering a project, giving a presentation to their peers and to their teachers along with the final exam. And so there's this combination of mastery-based and the collaborative work that they're doing on the projects.
So two points I want to highlight about that. As we're moving along the spectrum to more fluid, customized schedules, we do have more opportunity in models like that for mastery-based learning. Also, Matt mentioned the schedule there, the 24-hour, 7-day-a-week schedule or 12-hour, 7-day-a-week schedule. That is definitely not a necessary feature of a flex model. So don't feel like you would be locked into extending your day that much or your week that much. We also had touchstone education, which is an interesting case from the perspective of the taxonomy because they are on an individual rotation, but they also have a part of their day that is flex. So I think we had 3 groups that looked at touchstone. So if I could get just 2 of those groups to say just a little bit about how touchstone is working their model and your reactions to it, that would be great.
All 3 groups just decided that they were going to be the one that didn't report out.
Maybe I'll make all 3 of them report out.
Where are our touchstone groups?
We've got one here, table 6, I think.
All
and
right,
then
I'm
one
coming
back
towards
there
you.
with Michael.
Somebody's talking. They all look down.
All right, so we looked at the Flex model, and it looks mostly like it's internet-based content and instruction. Their basic schedule is strictly content, so they only have English, math, and science, and then they have a Flex block where they're doing intervention type stuff, and then it looks like an advisory, which is kind of like a homeroom where schedules are changing for students because the data is instantaneous due to the technology. So teachers receive outputs of the reports. They're working in a normal classroom. The teacher's able to move around. Students are working at their own pace on the content that they need to learn. And then teachers have a dashboard that they can access, and they get instant data about student progress, and then they can share that. The school day is extended Monday through Thursday so that the afternoon on Fridays, teachers can collaborate and figure out which students need to be in which groups for the following week, and they can change the schedule as needed. There's a lot of differentiation in the model, which was really nice. Some of the things that we felt it fell short on was there's no enrichment or electives, and I think that's a critical component to student learning, that we can't just kill them with content. There's got to be the art and the music and the PE and that kind of stuff. Otherwise, we run into those kind of problems.
Great, thanks. Michael, does your group have observations to add to that about Touchstone?
So I think, the exciting thing about Touchstone is I think their mission and their vision really of how personalization can happen in whether it be a traditional rotation model with Flex added is great in the sense that I think, the personalization of every student, their learning, their own individual learning path is great. I think it's a good tale of where technology, particularly digital content technology, still needs to catch up. They really wanted to have each student have an assessment, get the content exactly to their level where they needed it to, whether it be their reading, their math. And, that's partly there, but the reality is, that we're really still pushing to get more digital content that's as adaptive and as personalized as possible. So I think they've been great in pioneering how you can make this happen with all the resources that currently exist, and I think they're a great example of continuing to push software companies and developers to say, okay, well, let's make this even more flexible. And I think that's the key, is the flexibility, the ability to modularize content, to be able to pull, for this is a 6th grader who's 1st grade in reading and 5th grade in math, and then be able to assign them what they need when they need it. And so I think that's a challenge, is how much is that teacher driven? Are they creating this content? Are they, having to organize and analyze and put all this together versus, how much is that available readily just to adaptively give to students? So.
Great. Table 1, anything to add, Amy? Thanks.
I couldn't help but note that they get $14,000 per student. And it's really curious, though, because a lot of these schools that have started a blended model have done it because they had cost and budget restrictions. And then when you look at the way that they've set themselves up in this model, it doesn't really look that dramatic. I couldn't see how different it was with $14,000 a kid versus $8,000 or $6,000 a kid. So I'd be curious, for those of you who might know it better, are there things that they're doing with that extra resources that are that much better and different for kids with people and technology than we can do for less?
Okay.
One of the first things I noticed was the co-teacher model. Yeah, one of the first things I noticed in the video was the co-teacher model, and one of my thoughts was that's not sustainable, and that was before I looked at the figures on the handout. And once I looked at that, I also said, well, the whole thing's not sustainable or scalable across the country because most states fall well short of that. So they're just critical questions to ask of that model for sure.
So this is something that I think we've pushed the paradigm a little bit on, is we created a teaching fellowship where we train new teachers because we knew that we really valued having a lot of small group instruction. And so we have effectively created a co-teaching model on existing PPR. So I think the question is, how do we continue to create experiences for kids that we believe are valuable, and then push our thinking around how do we get there? Because I would love to operate at $15K a kid, but we operate in a very different environment.
Just one observation on taxonomies, and I think this model, probably better than the others, is indicative of it, which is the Insight taxonomies are great. They're really helpful at trying to say this school is X, this school is Y, but trying to pretend as though each school that is going to be innovative, that is going to come up with designs are going to neatly fit into the Insight taxonomy is a false assumption. And in fact, I would propose that some of the most innovative models that come out of blended personalized learning are going to be either amalgamations of various models or may not neatly fit into any of the models that Insight proposes. So just be careful as you think about that. Don't go to your teaching staff and so forth and say, choose, are you going to be a flex model or are you going to be a classroom rotation model today? Because that's in some cases a false choice. And I think this is a really good example that exemplifies you can actually do both and use flexible time in certain parts of the day and use a classroom rotation in other parts of the day as well.
Thanks for that. I think that's part of why we wanted 3 groups to grapple with Touchstone, because it doesn't fit neatly into the taxonomy. And this is a great point from Scott about where the future of blended learning is going and where all of you might take it. So you don't need to be locked into the taxonomy. The taxonomy illustrates a range, a continuum of possibilities. The second to last model that we'll look at, we have one group here that looked at the self-blend model by looking at Quakertown Community School District in Pennsylvania. In the self-blend model, students take one or more classes that are fully online as part of a full school day that includes also some amount of time spent in a brick-and-mortar location, a traditional school, for example. Would you guys like to say a little bit more about what Quakertown is doing and your reactions to it?
Okay, our impression was that Quakertown is really on the edge of a technology-rich learning environment and a self-blended. And they gave each of the students netbooks, and like was just described, they are taking one or more courses in a traditional school. So the way they're self-blended is the kids are able to control the time and place at which they do the classes. So to the extent they want to get out of school early to go work or do other types of activities, this allows them that flexibility. And that was one of the things that we saw as a benefit. An interesting perspective of this particular model, the teachers who teach the online courses are also the teachers that teach the traditional classes. And so the students have access to their online teachers in face-to-face office hours, as well as they host online chats. So that was something that was kind of interesting. One thing that we thought this model provided families who are more traditional but wanted to branch into online, it gives them the ability to kind of put their toe in and test the water, as opposed to jumping to a full blended school. So that may give some parents some comfort and also give kids some, like Mandarin Chinese. If they would not otherwise have that, they can stay in their traditional classes for most of the time, but jump out to the self-blended for some of the courses. Some of the things we noticed about this particular model, they showed an increase in test scores and a decrease in dropout rates. So that was significant. So it's obviously working for some students. And a last thing that we saw that was we thought was interesting was the involvement at every level, because the district was initiating this to avoid students leaving for other cyber schools. And so the district was heavily invested in it. The teachers were heavily invested. They were creating some of their own courses as well as supplementing with other content providers. And then obviously the family and the students were. So it seems like there was a lot of involvement and interest in this model.
Thanks. Great summary. One thing that I want to point out about that, you mentioned that this was the teachers that were teaching the face-to-face classes that are also teaching the online classes. That was a big part of how you framed Quakertown's response to this market challenge of the cyber charters proliferating in Pennsylvania. But that absolutely, again, doesn't have to be a feature of the self-blend model, that the same teachers are teaching the face-to-face and the online courses. So it goes back to Scott's point. If we've given you examples, we've given you a taxonomy, and we've given you examples that fit most of them, except for Touchstone, within that taxonomy. But there's a range in the taxonomy and a range in implementation of schools that might even say we've chosen a specific model in the taxonomy, the choices they make about content and what their teachers do. The enriched virtual model is the last example in the taxonomy, the last category. In the enriched virtual model, students are taking their classes online, but have an opportunity either at their own selection or at the instigation of a teacher or other adult to get extra support, either based on student need or a student's performance. So an example might be a student who's performing well, isn't required to come into a center for that extra support, but one who's getting a student who's getting a C or a D might be called in, or they might choose to go to a center to get that extra support that combines, therefore, in the blend, combines the face-to-face with the online instruction. So we've come up on our time for this part of the models and staffing discussion. We're now at the intermission. And what I'm going to do, because I know from walking around and hearing you talk and from the report outs that there is a really wide range of experience levels in this room. Some of you are already implementing some of these models. Some of you, your heads, I'm sure, are swimming with the details of these models. So I'm going to give you three choices. The first one is I'm going to set up my computer up here and ask a couple other people to set up theirs. If you'd like to come up and just use this as a bank of computers to look at the other models, to learn a little bit more about the ones you didn't have a chance to see, we'll have printouts, if I can gather them up, and videos so you can watch and learn about some of the other models that other groups were talking about. That's option one. Option two is if you'd like to take just the next 10 minutes or so for a quiet think and write time to try to bring your thoughts together about how all of these different models, the lessons they might have for you at your schools and programs. And the third option, I hesitate to give it, but if you do need to get up and stretch, get some coffee or tea and take a short break, that's okay. We will come back in about 10 minutes to start into the staffing discussion, and that will keep us on task to get to lunch on time. So we'll set up the station up here. Feel free to think and write about how these examples apply to you, or take a short break. So we talked about blended models in the session before the intermission. Now we're going to move to focus on staffing. I'd like to suggest to you that there are three approaches to staffing in blended learning models. In the first, you might see staffing as a constraint. And this might come in because you think your existing teachers aren't ready, aren't willing to move to a blended model. It could come in because of some various policy issues. So it could come in due to class size limits. It could come in due to teacher license restrictions. Other policies that aren't teacher policies but impact teacher policies, like the school schedule, like seat time in the Carnegie unit. Seeing what you do in a blended model as constrained by staffing and staffing-related policies is one approach to staffing in blended models. A second one is to say, let's take our existing space, our existing staff, and try to figure out which of the blended models that are out there will fit well within what we're already doing. So Quakertown did this a little bit. They said, we're not going to be knocking down walls, we're going to keep the same bell schedule, but we want to do a blend, because we want to respond to that competition from the cyber charters and for the other reasons that this group well articulated before the break. A lot of a lot of the rotation models that are being put into place, particularly at the elementary level, are doing this in part because it's easier to fit within the existing space and staffing constraints. What I'd like you to do for the next half hour or so is to throw both of these aside. So put yourself in Amy Anderson's shoes. Say, I'm going to have no constraints in front of me. I'm not going to have, I'm going to be thinking about a system where the existing policy constraints are no longer on my radar, and I'm not bound by what I am doing today. So I'm really looking at what the ideal is and what is best for students. And within that, thinking about blended learning as an opportunity to rethink how we do staffing at your schools. Why focus on staffing? The details on this slide, which I won't read through point by point, but these apply whether you're talking about blended learning or not. From a student's point of view, the best teachers are reaching too few students. There's too much time spent with those teachers on the basics, and there aren't enough options for students. Now, see, I said I wasn't going to read them, and now I've just read 3 of them. So from the teacher's point of view, we are thinking, and rightly so, about students, but also for teachers, we can think about rethinking staffing as a way to make teaching a more attractive profession in the long term, to attract more great teachers in and to retain them once we have them there. Excellent teachers defined in one way, and I realize this is just one way of thinking about excellence, but if we look at student growth as measured by standardized test scores, excellent teachers, which I'm defining as those whose students achieve a year and a half worth of progress or more, that's the top 25 of teachers in our classrooms today. Those teachers get 3 times the progress of those in the lowest quartile, whose students achieve about a half a year's worth of growth per year. And the next 2 slides illustrate a simple but profound point, that if you have a student who starts out a year behind and has a really good teacher, or has an excellent teacher who achieves that year and a half worth of growth, they need that level of teaching for 2 years to be caught up. A student who starts out 2 years behind needs excellent teaching for 4 years to be caught up. And those who start on grade level or catch up, excellent teaching for them means an opportunity to leap ahead. But for those whose teachers are, for those students who are achieving a year's worth of growth, and I understand, and we all in this room understand how much blood, sweat, and tears it takes to get that year's worth of growth, particularly with challenging student populations. Teachers who are able to do that with students who start out a year behind, their students are still a year behind at the end of that year. If they start out 2 years behind, they remain there. And if they start on grade level, they don't have that opportunity to leap ahead. So we don't have enough excellent teaching going on in our classrooms. Or I should say that differently. That excellent teaching isn't reaching enough students. At Public Impact, where I work, we've spent the better part of the last 10 years doing work in the kind of traditional reform areas that you see on this slide, helping systems and schools think about recruitment, trying to bring more excellent teachers in the door, developing them, and retaining them. And so about 3 or 4 years ago, my executive directors did a thought experiment and said, let's take a wildly optimistic set of assumptions. Let's say that over the next 5 years, we were able to double the top teacher recruitment in all of our classes nationwide. We were able to cut top teacher attrition in half for those 5 years, and for good measure, we were able to triple the dismissal of the lowest performing teachers. And when we ran those numbers, we found that even doing those things for 5 years, at the end of those 5 years, about 60% of our classrooms would still be without excellent teachers in charge of them. And so we thought, we need to keep doing these things. They are hugely important. We're not going to back off of the work that we're doing and that so many folks are doing well. But we have to think about other strategies too. And so what we're now focused on at Public Impact is designing uses of technology, strategic uses of technology, and job redesign in combination to extend the reach of excellent teachers to more students. And I've been saying a lot about students, but from the teacher's point of view, again, rethinking staffing roles in combination with strategic uses of technology is an opportunity to build what we're calling an opportunity culture, where teachers can reach more students, where they can reach more students in the areas where they are most passionate or most expert. We had both Todd and Judy mentioned this morning on the panel instances of this already happening, tailoring what your teachers are doing to their areas of expertise and letting them do it more. And that, I would submit, can help make the teaching profession more rewarding for your teachers, which will bring more great teachers in and keep them in our classrooms. So at Public Impact, what we've done is to design a set of staffing structures. We call them staffing models, but to avoid confusion with the models that we talked about this morning, I'm going to refer to them as structures. And on our website, which is opportunityculture.org, for free, there are details of about 20 plus staffing structures that can be used. Some of them don't involve technology at all, but many of them do, to extend the reach of teachers, great teachers, to more students, to allow those great teachers to earn more. Going to the point about Touchstone, we are focused on making sure that that is done in a financially sustainable way that can be done within existing budgets. And we have tools on our website that school design teams can use, both to develop teachers for recruitment and selection of teachers geared towards new roles and new types of staffing structures. So I would invite you to check those out. We won't be previewing them in this context today, but just as a resource for all of you who are going to be doing design work after today. It is completely possible, and many schools are doing it, to implement blended learning models without changing much, if anything, about staffing. So in a rotation model, you can add a bank of computers into each of your classrooms, have students rotate to online learning, but keep the staffing structures the same so that students experience the same mix of teacher quality or teacher excellence they experience now. The same could be said of the other models. And what we have on the right-hand column here is what we see as some of the benefits of combining the blended models with staffing structures that extend great teachers' reach. Rotation and flex models open up time for teachers. So what we saw in the simple classroom rotation model, if you weren't doing it before and you start taking 8 students at a time into an online rotation, that is time that you would otherwise be spending with those students that you now have to do something else. And one of those things might be to reach more students as an individual teacher. Another thing might be to engage in more targeted development activities yourself, or to engage in leadership type activities. I'll highlight a few of the things that we think teachers might do in new staffing structures with the increased time that a time technology swap, a rotation or flex model allows. So one thing, subject matter specialization, something that's done customarily at the middle and high school level, could also be done at the elementary level, where teachers could rotate, could specialize in a subject or a subject matter pair, or role specialization. So those teachers who are expert in or passionate about project-based learning could do more of that. Those who are expert in or passionate about whole group instruction could do more of that. And we'll talk a little bit more about the mechanics of this in a few minutes. Multi-classroom leadership. These are opportunities for teachers to do, it's not simply a mentorship or a department head model. In multi-classroom leadership, teachers are actually in charge of the instruction that is provided by other teachers. And they are guiding them in their development, but also in their curricular choices and their instructional choices. And finally, remote teaching. We heard a great example of this from Todd, of teachers being able to take what they do well and reach students in remote locations. Could be elsewhere in the state or also in other states. So I wanted to say just a few things about a few actual schools that are doing this right now. We had one this morning that Amy Murin mentioned, Cornerstone Health High School in Detroit. They have 4 different roles that their teachers play. One is the relationship manager role, which ensures that students are setting and meeting challenging goals. And those relationship managers are helping students craft individualized learning plans and to progress along them. Cornerstone also has relevance managers. These are teachers who are providing direct instruction. They have what they call rigor managers, who oversee the online coursework and help set the standards by which the success of that online coursework is judged. And then they have success coaches. And those success coaches are helping students make the transition to college and careers. So 4 different roles within their school structure. We, at Public Impact, we're also working with a group of schools in Charlotte and in Nashville, district schools there. Allenbrook Elementary School, which is in Charlotte, is combining a rotation model with multi-classroom leadership, where we have one excellent teacher who is in charge of the delivery of the choices that are made by 4 novice or developing teachers. We have Ashley Park Pre-K, which is a multi-classroom leadership model that spans 2 grade levels, or at the middle school level spans 6 to 8. We have Bailey STEM Magnet, which is in Nashville, where they have multi-classroom leadership happening in all grades. And they have subject-specialized pods, they call them, of teams of 4 teachers. So this is subject specialization, multi-classroom leadership of these 4 teachers in a pod, and then 2 or 3 learning coaches who are also involved. So different roles, different staffing structures enabled by the technology. It comes back to the time that is freed in a rotation or a flex model and what you do with it. So in just a minute, I'm going to send this back out to you with a set of questions to evaluate, a scenario to think about the different alternatives. What I want to do really quick is just give a quick window into some of the mechanics. I don't want to get mired down in the details, but just to show you what a couple of these model combinations look like from a student's point of view and a teacher's point of view. Here we have a day in the life of a student and a teacher in a model that combines elementary level subject specialization and a rotation. So here we have 2 language arts and social studies teachers. There are 100 students in a grade. Each of these language arts and social studies teachers teaches 2 classes of 25 students each. The math and science teacher teaches 4 classes of 25 students each. And then there is a support staff that includes the lab monitor and the learning coach. How this looks for a student, they're spending some time, a small amount of time, up to an hour a day, in the digital lab with a lab monitor. How this breaks out for the teacher A, one of those 2 language arts teachers that I mentioned, teaches language arts and then social studies in the morning to 1 class, and then being the subject matter specialist, repeats that in the afternoon. The freeing up of the teacher's time that occurs by students spending a part of the day in the lab allows them more time in the middle of the day for the activities that you see listed in the middle of the slide. The math and science teacher also has this block in the middle of the day. The distinction here is that this teacher is teaching the math and science class 4 times. So you can think about different ways to combine your staff to reach more students in these ways. Another example would be a week in the life. Here we have a student's point of view and a teacher and a lab monitor's point of view at the secondary level, a secondary rotation model. So what we have is a team, a math and science team. These teachers are teaching 9 classes of 25 students each. And you say, how is that going to be possible? If our goal at the front end of designing this school was to have these teachers reach more students, there are different ways we could do it. But one way would be to say, these teachers aren't going to see the same students every day. We're going to rotate them on Monday, Wednesday, and alternating Friday, and Tuesday, Thursday, and alternating Friday schedules, so that they are in direct contact with more students over the course of a week. So here, what you have, combining the students' time that's spent on digital learning, you're changing the teacher's role to reach more students, but also giving them more planning time at the end of these 3 days. How this looks then for a student, you see that they have, if you look at period 2, on one of the sets of alternating days, they're spending that time in math class with that excellent teacher in the classroom. On the alternating days, they're doing math in the digital lab, and science, the same kind of swap. And this shows the digital lab monitor's perspective, but I won't get locked down into that. There's another example in your handout, your green/blue handout. If you go to, let's see, it looks like the 3rd page in, that's a table, looks like a big schedule. And then on the back of that page is the second half of this schedule. This was designed to be laid out side by side. But what it shows is what students are doing in a multi-class leadership model. So we are taking a rotation, but we're also taking a multi-classroom leadership model. And so if you look on the first page that says sample student and staff schedule, on the right-hand side it says what is the MCL, the multi-class leader, doing in this model. And if you just read down that, you'll see some examples of the kinds of activities a multi-classroom leader could engage in. They could be involved in direct instruction, and in fact, in the places that I mentioned, in Nashville and Charlotte, where we are doing this, there's a lot of direct instruction still happening from that multi-class leader. They're also co-teaching, they're developing, they're observing, and they're planning. So there are a lot of different activities the multi-class leader is involved in. The other part of the schedule shows what happens with the other teachers in this one example of a multi-class leadership model. So I'll let you take those, and we're going to move to a scenario, also in your green packet. I'm sorry, I'm getting the pages flipped. If you flip back a page, there's something that says Scenario Discussion, Reaching All Students with Excellence. And what we've done is we've fed you a scenario. And in this scenario, you have 2 grade levels, 3rd and 4th grade. What you're starting with is 100 students in each grade. In each grade, you have 1 excellent teacher, 2 really good teachers, and 1 teacher who's new. So we don't know anything about what their performance is going to be like over time. They are currently implementing a rotation model in this school. But what we'd like you to do is take about 10 minutes, and you're going to say, we could knock down any wall in this school. We can get devices if we need more. We can change what our staff do. I know this isn't realistic if we pull it back to what you're dealing with in the day-to-day, but the first part of the exercise is to be idealistic about this. Search for the Holy Grail. Think about what you could do if you threw off all of the policy constraints, all of the existing challenges that you face as far as staff readiness, professional development, and what would you do to answer these 4 questions? Rethink staffing structures to give students direct access to more excellent teachers. The second one is what to do with the time that is freed by a rotation model. If you decided to go with a rotation or a flex model, what are the biggest value adds in your mind? Doing multi-classroom leadership, designing new roles, introducing subject matter specialization into the mix. What's going to be most impactful for a school and for those students and for those teachers? Which goes to the third question. How can these new staffing structures capitalize on teachers' strengths and teachers' passions? And how can we give teachers an opportunity to lead other teachers and to give them more time to collaborate and develop? So we've set you up with 2 grades, 100 students, 4 teachers, a process that could take you 18 months we're asking you now to engage in 10 minutes. So this will be the start of what I hope will be a useful thought process for you and a discussion today around staffing. So we'd love for you to spend just the next 10 minutes introducing with your team, your table team, the ideas that seem to resonate most to you in these staffing structures.